Welcome to the Emotional Eating Unwrapped podcast. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, an emotional eating and weight loss coach for women looking to fall in love with eating, create healthy attachments with food, and lose weight sustainably. Hello and welcome to another episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, and I love today's episode. Today's episode is about emotional eating and long-term relationships, how our relationships, our long-term partnerships shape our eating habits, our behaviors with food, just all of that stuff that I think we just feel as humans in partnership and that we don't always talk about. It kind of becomes this thing that we think is just how it is, but there are a lot of things underneath that I think are really, really worth exploring. Because when I've talked before about emotional eating and, issues with food and romantic overlay, right? Like when we talk about it in that context, we've talked about it we've talked about it in the context of dating, and we've talked about it in the context of the pressure to look a certain way, the insecurities that surface, maybe how food can become an emotional buffer, how food can be utilized to kind of deal with, like avoidance almost of being in a relationship. But what about when you're already in a committed long-term relationship? Right? What if we're not just using food to react from our dating life or from an experience that we have with somebody that we don't know well? What if we're not just talking about, eating, emotionally eating as it relates to dating and insecurities? What if we're talking about we're already in a committed relationship and we share a life together? And what happens when there's emotional eating habits and patterns that start to arise when you're in the relationship, and when comfort, connection, and even conflict start to show up through your relationship with food and your eating habits. And I feel like this is a topic that I feel like, doesn't really get as much airtime as some other topics, because it's almost like once you're in a relationship, we live in this culture where it's like once you found love, once you found a relationship, then you must have got it all figured out. You must not have any issues anymore with food, right? It's like, what issues can you really have if you have someone that loves you? But the truth is that there's a lot. There's a lot. We humans are complicated, complex, nuanced people. And long-term relationships don't just shape how we love another person, they deeply influence how we treat ourselves. So our habits, our routines, our sense of self-worth, and our connection to food can all be impacted and affected by the person that we share our life with. And sometimes without even realizing it, because it becomes so regular, it becomes so autopilot, we can either nurture or sabotage our goals, our emotional well-being. We can create a dysregulated nervous system for ourselves. And it's really important that we bring these conversations to the fore and explore them. So today we're going to dig deep into how shared habits in long-term relationships can influence emotional eating, how relationship dynamics can trigger or soothe emotional eating patterns, why body image and intimacy often shift as relationships evolve, and how to break free from unhealthy patterns without damaging the connection that you've built with your partner. And I feel like that last one is one of the main reasons why we end up kind of allowing ourselves to live in these these kind of toxic, more unhealthy dynamics, because we're so afraid of losing the connection. But by the end of today's episode, you're going to see that that's not the case. So let's start with shared habits. Let's talk about the comfort and the conflict of shared habits. So one of the most beautiful parts of a long-term relationship is a sense of comfort, right? It's like I know for myself, I love that. Being married, I do. I love having a person. I love that, that safety of just knowing that you have someone in your corner. There's, you're building something with someone, and over time, couples naturally build rituals together. And a lot of times those rituals are revolved around food, right? So there's shared meals, favorite snacks, cozy nights in with takeout, right? Like there's rituals. And these rituals and these routines can help create intimacy. And it's true. Like, and that's really valuable. That's really, really important, because the truth is that these rituals and these routines are a language of love. They're a language of connection, and they're a way to deepen the safety and unwind together, create some shared joy. But here's where it gets a little bit more complicated, is that this comfort, these rituals, can quietly mask emotional eating patterns, right? And it's hard to see, right? Like maybe it's that Friday night dessert habit, right? It's something that started as a sweet ritual, but has turned into this like unconscious reflex that you're doing whether you're hungry or not, whether you truly want it or not. It's like you feel like this ritual and routine is not governed anymore by your own connection to yourself. It's governed by this routine and ritual, right? Or maybe the Friday night pizza and wine has become a way to escape the week's stress, but now it feels like you need that ritual to decompress, right? It's like it's autopilot. It's not something that is serving you anymore, other than something that's just become a habit that isn't necessarily generating anything else, and even might be a dependency, right? Or maybe your partner's habits are influencing yours without you even realizing it. Like maybe they snack while watching TV. Maybe they, have certain eating habits that they want you to participate in, that you start participating in because you want to feel connected to them, but you don't necessarily want to eat that food. You're not physically hungry. And because these rituals are shared, it's harder to recognize when emotional eating is happening. It becomes our thing, quote unquote. It's a sign of togetherness. And when food becomes wrapped up in feelings of connection, it becomes more difficult to separate comfort eating or like emotional eating. And so here's the questions that I want you to ask yourself to help you discern this, okay? Because creating this discernment within yourself and starting to recognize these habits and patterns and beginning to disentangle autopilot and habit and potentially even emotional eating from true ritual connection is awareness and curiosity. So I want you to ask yourself, is this shared ritual still bringing me joy and connection, or has it become a way to numb, distract, or even avoid deeper emotions? Is this ritual serving our real connection, or is it now masking other things? Okay, recognizing that line is the first step towards breaking free from this unconscious pattern without sacrificing the bond you've built with your partner, right? Because it also doesn't have to be black and white, right? It doesn't mean that you never do it again. It's just that now you get to discern when you're doing these things. And the truth is that when you do that, they have more meaning and they're rooted in integrity, which is something that we really have to build within ourselves if we want to heal and overcome emotional eating and, binging, and just create a healthier attachment with eating and food. Okay, so the second thing we're going to talk about is emotional eating as a coping mechanism within the relationship. Okay, so now this might be a little bit more uncomfortable, right? Because now we're talking about, what if we're emotionally eating as a way to cope with the relationship itself. So we're not emotionally eating anymore because it's our shared ritual and it's become autopilot and we've become mindless around it. Now we're emotionally eating because the relationship is stressful. We have conflict. And here's the thing, in the healthiest relationships, there's conflict. So I'm not saying that all conflict means that that's bad necessarily, but we want to understand. So conflict is inevitable, miscommunication happens, inevitable, stress builds, right? We get this feeling of disconnection. And so many people, it's one of those things that kind of happens in small doses over time until it becomes a bigger thing that you can recognize. So that's why if you're listening to this podcast, I want you to think about your life. And if you're starting to feel the tinges or the twinges of maybe some underlying conflict that you're shoving under the rug. Because a lot of times, instead of talking about these feelings, instead of talking through these feelings, instead of creating emotional collaboration and understanding, you might find yourself reaching for, right? Because the truth of the matter is, so many people have challenging times, not only naming and addressing their own feelings, but communicating them with others. That is something that is a massive skill. It's something that every woman that I've ever worked with, we work on, because feeling seen, feeling heard is huge in overcoming emotional eating, right? If we don't feel seen and heard, it is difficult to overcome emotional eating. And especially if we're in a relationship, a long-term partnership where we share space with someone, right? Like the skill of communicating and collaborating to meet each other's needs is hugely valuable and is a necessary skill. Okay, so if you're listening to this and maybe after an argument, you don't really address the issue and instead you soothe the tension with eating, right? Whether it's by yourself or you guys just do it together, right? Maybe you're carrying more of the emotional load in the relationship, right? Maybe you're carrying the emotional and the financial load in the relationship. And you're feeling really unsupported. You're managing the house, the kids, the schedules. You're also bringing in the cash, right? And food becomes the only space where you can give something back to yourself, even if it is just like a fleeting thing, right? It's like this is a huge trigger. And then another huge one is maybe your partner's relationship with food is unhealthy. And maybe they have unhealthy eating habits. They maybe emotionally eat a little bit, don't listen to their hunger cues, use food to soothe. And without even realizing it, their habits start reinforcing your own emotional eating patterns. Emotional eating becomes a shared ritual, right? So what's important to understand is that emotional eating doesn't just soothe personal stress, it can also become a silent way of coping with unspoken relationship stress, relationship tension. But, using food to cope with relationship tension doesn't just hurt you. What happens usually is like resentment builds. It can create distance between you and your partner. You get resentful. They sense that like maybe you're abandoning yourself and like respect is lost. There's like some sort of resentment there. Like no one is getting what they really want. And instead of dealing with the root issues, the emotions stay buried. And then they stay buried underneath more kind of feelings that are hard and rigid, like resentment or anger, guardedness. And then all that's really there to keep you guys connected because obviously you want to have something to keep you connected if you're sharing a life together. Food becomes that band-aid that on the surface ends up holding things together. And so you want to ask yourself when you're noticing that maybe this is a pattern for you, am I avoiding a conversation that I need to have, and am I eating instead? Is this food helping me numb feelings of resentment, frustration, loneliness, neglect? Is this a pattern potentially that I feel stuck in, but I'm too nervous and afraid to rock the boat and address it with my partner? Right? If any of these questions are resonating with you, I just want you to know that you are not failing at all. In fact, you're now ahead of the game, and all you've been doing is using the tools that you've learned to survive and to stay and to feel like you belong and to feel that connection. But it doesn't have to be like this. You can evolve past this more primitive, superficial surface coping mechanism. I remember what it felt like to be stuck in the cycle of emotional eating. I tried every diet out there, counting, tracking, restricting, but nothing ever worked. Food controlled my life, my thoughts, and I constantly felt guilty after eating. But once I learned how to heal the emotional triggers behind my eating and trust my body, everything changed. I stopped obsessing over food, the weight started coming off naturally, and I found real freedom in how I ate and lived. So I created the Sober Eating year-long mentorship to help other women experience the same transformation. So you can stop battling with food, you can lose weight without deprivation, and you can feel confident in your body again. In this mentorship, you'll have access to my proven nervous system rewiring method. You'll have access to live coaching with me, weekly accountability, and a community of women who truly understand your journey. You'll also have free access to my signature programs, the Emotional Eating Solution and Decoding Permanent Weight Loss, valued at $2,000. Click the link in the show notes to explore the mentorship today. You don't have to do this alone. I'll be right there with you every step of the way. All right, so let's talk about body image, intimacy, and self-perception in long-term relationships. All right, so as we know, bodies change over time, right? That's a fact. There's aging, there's childbirth, there's hormonal shifts, bodies change shape. And sometimes even in loving, supportive relationships, those changes can trigger insecurity. And that's for heterosexual relationships, that's for homosexual relationships, that's for all relationships. This isn't just women. I'd say that women feel it more than men do, but I know men that feel this way. Right? You might compare your current body to the one you've had when you first met your partner. You might wonder if your partner still finds you attractive, even if they've never given you a reason to doubt it. You might avoid intimacy, not because your partner has done anything or said anything wrong, but because you don't feel comfortable in your own skin. And when those things start to happen, right, when these body changes happen, when this insecurity starts to rise and starts to get super overwhelming, where do a lot of people turn? Even though they don't want to, they turn to food. Food becomes the thing that soothes the fear of not being good enough. It numbs the anxiety around how our bodies have changed. Right? It allows us to kind of escape from the reality of the inevitability of change. That's something that honestly, personally, I'm dealing with now at 44 years old. Going through different changes in my body, it's weird. Things that, I just feel different in my body, and it's something that I really relate to this one. I really, really relate to this one. And I know that many women feel the same way. I know many women use food to help escape the vulnerability of the intimacy that partnership and long-term partnership, especially where you're sharing the space together, you're living together, has, right? And so something that also becomes really challenging is the pressure to prioritize the we for me, right? In long-term relationships, it's easy to lose sight of your personal goals, your personal rituals, your personal routines. It's easy to say like, oh, I was going to go for that run. I was going to meditate. I was going to do that yoga class, but my partner wants to do this instead. And this is our ritual and routine. We're supposed to eat this on this time, but I prefer to potentially do this for myself. And I don't want to do this because I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to disrupt, right? I don't want to disrupt the ritual of our Friday night pizza and wine to go to that yoga class that's going to help me feel better about my changing body, right? Because we feel like if we choose me, we're going to lose the we, right? I don't want to hurt their feelings by turning down the chocolates they brought home for me from their trip, right? So we prioritize their feelings, thinking that it's we, but it's actually not, it's them, right? And I think it's really important that we recognize that when we sacrifice what we want to do, or maybe our priorities have shifted and changed, but it doesn't mean that we're not prioritizing the relationship. It just means that the capacity needs to grow for more space, for more things to happen, and to still feel connected, right? You can prioritize your own desires, your own healing, your own, the things that are going to make you feel good without sacrificing your relationship. Your partner doesn't have to be an obstacle. They can be your biggest supporter if you, again, communicate with them about how this new ritual, this new routine isn't a shutting the door on the old routine, or isn't a rejection of them, but in fact, it's just going to enhance the connection. But we have to work at creating this new evolution of the connection, of the ritual. Okay, so how do we break patterns without breaking connection, right? We've talked about it, but let's just kind of sum it up. Because I think damaging the connection is probably one of the biggest fears that people have when it comes to this topic today. So we've said it 100 times, but I'll repeat it. It starts with open, compassionate communication. So you want to be open with your partner about your thought processes, what you're going through, and not from a place of blame or aggressiveness, but from a place of collaboration, a place of vulnerability. You can invite them to share their feelings too. Sometimes you'll discover that your partner has been hiding their own struggles, and you being courageous to talk about it makes it okay for them to talk about it. And now your shared ritual and connection can be emotional intimacy, right? Where you create this new space of routine and ritual, of deep connection and holding space for each other, and really seeing and hearing each other. Because a lot of times the feeling that we think we're going to get when we do the shared eating thing and those rituals around food, we don't get that feeling. But you can get that feeling when you're truthful about your experience and you share that with them and invite them to share theirs. Okay, and the next thing is find new rituals that strengthen your bond that don't revolve around food. So, instead of getting Chinese and whatever, go for an evening walk. Try cooking a new recipe together. I love doing that. So actually that's a ritual and routine that my husband and I have, where we specifically cook super high nutritional value food together on the weekend. That is a ritual that we have, and it's amazing because we both feel so good after we eat. We love cooking together. We have our own jobs. He makes a drink for us, which is always so fun. And it's always, we always choose something that's really high nutritional value and is going to feel really good for our digestion. It's going to kick us off. We usually do it on a weekend. and it'll kick off our weekend on a good note. And then you also want to shift the focus away from food, from a shared experience, like hikes, board games, other things, just things that aren't always revolving around eating. Don't always have food involved. And we want to respect each other's needs and boundaries. So your partner does not have to change their eating habits for you to make progress. Okay, this is something that I see a lot with clients of mine and women that I work with in the mentorship, is that they feel like it is a hindrance for them when they're trying to get healthier with their emotional eating and their compulsions with food, that their partner isn't also trying to change their habits with food. That rituals and routines that now they know are not healthy, your partner's not willing to change those rituals and routines. Like, they still want to snack while watching Netflix at 11 o'clock at night. And though that can bring up emotions or, energy within you, they don't need to change their eating habits for you if they don't see it's a problem for them. That's why it's so important to create rituals and routines of connection separate from Netflix and eating, separate from these like routines that are fodder and breeding grounds for emotional eating. Because we can't expect our partners to do exactly what we're going to do. Right? But what you can do is that if your partner ends up pushing food on you because they want you to participate with them while they're eating their snacks at 11 o'clock at night watching Netflix, you could say no to that. They need to respect your boundaries, right? And you can say, I'm actually working on my mindful eating and connecting to myself, and I make choices with eating and, weight loss, whatever it is. And so I'm going to pass. And they need to be okay with that. Right. But this is a journey, just like you're going to have feelings when your partner doesn't change their eating habits for you. They're going to have feelings when you say no to them. But the most important thing is that you guys don't see that as a rejection of each other. You see that as an opportunity to support each other in a new way. And then let's talk about the physical part, right? The intimacy, the physical connection, because I do think this is something that maybe is underlying for some people, but we just don't talk about it as much. And so I think it's important, and I do this actually. I talk openly to my husband about my body image struggles when I have them. Right? I let him know how I'm feeling, even if it's uncomfortable. Like, I will say, like, oh, I don't feel so good in my body today. I'm feeling really, bloated and just not comfortable in my body. And I share that with him, right? And I've also expressed to him that I'm not looking for him to tell me to go work out or give me some sort of fix, find solutions for me. I just want him to be like, that's okay, babe. Like, it's hard. And, tell me he still loves me, which of course I know, but it's nice to hear. And it's really nice to unburden the pressure and that feeling that I have inside about my body insecurity and be able to share it, because that's one of the great things about being in a partnership, is that you can share these things with people. You can share these things with your partner. And that ability to feel held and seen and truly unconditionally supported in your insecurity, that creates the connection that we think food, avoiding the conversation and creating distance, is going to create, because it doesn't. It doesn't create that. Vulnerability, communication does. And then the last thing I do want to say is that if you're in a partnership and the conflicts feel very hard and overwhelming, and you don't find that support through listening to this podcast or joining the mentorship or like any, support in these kind of ways are helping you, you really might want to consider couples counseling, support from a professional. You really might want to think about tools and learning tools, and maybe more, maybe more support at a higher proximity to really work through your individual issues. And of course, that is everybody. Everybody is in their own relationship and everybody knows what they need. But just because there's conflict doesn't mean there's not love. And, love deserves effort to make it work. And so if food related conflict, whether it's food related that's covering up other conflict, or, you're struggling there, there's this struggle between the two of you to really get on the same page with this, working with a coach one-on-one, or, a professional one-on-one to get, one-on-one and together as a couple can help you both feel supported through the process for sure. Okay, so here's what I want you to remember from today's episode. Your healing does not have to come at the sacrifice of your partnership, at the sacrifice of your relationship. You don't have to make a choice. My healing, my feeling good, or my relationship, right? Because the truth of the matter is that long-term partnerships can actually be a portal to the healing that you're really looking to feel, to the connection, to the love, to the belonging that you're looking to feel and that you've tried to get through eating and food. But you have to be willing to approach this, this issue and this habit and your feelings with curiosity, with openness, with vulnerability, with compassion, with forgiveness, with patience, right? Because the patterns that you and your partner have around food, individually and together as a couple, don't have to stay fixed, right? You can rewrite the story together. And that's the beautiful thing about partnership. You can rewrite the story together, one that prioritizes connection, respect, and mutual growth. Okay? So as always, I am wishing you a week full of grace, self-compassion, deeper connection with yourself, with your partner, if you're in a long-term partnership, and with everyone that you love in your life. And thank you so much for listening. If you are watching this on YouTube, please give us a subscribe. Please like our videos. Please like us on Spotify and Apple, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And until next time, I'm Alana, and thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.